"I'm a wanted man," he said. But his daughter begged, this lost fat mail-order bride, "Please be my mama." The sheriff slammed Magnolia's cheek against the saloon bar so hard the glasses rattled. "Look what we dragged in, boys," he jeered, fingers digging into the soft flesh of her arm. The lost fat mail-order bride. Silas Grimm's runaway cow finally wandered back toward Copper Ridge. Men laughed from their tables, boots thudding, poker chips clicking. Magnolia Hayes squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the sting of splinters and shame. Her dress was torn from days on the trail, damp with sweat and dried mud. Bruises ringed her wrists where Blackwell's men had tied her. "I'm not his bride," she gasped. "I never even made it to his ranch." "Doesn't matter what you say," the sheriff drawled. "All that matters is what the mayor says. Mayor Blackwell claims you're a thief and a liar, just like the man you're sniffing around for." He yanked her upright so the whole saloon could see her, soft chin trembling, curls falling from a crooked bun, blue eyes bright with terrified defiance. "You know the name Elijah Stone, don't you, sweetheart?" The sheriff's breath reeked of whiskey. Tall, broad, big, ugly scar on his shoulder. Your type, maybe. They say he burned his own wife alive for the insurance money. Magnolia's heart thudded so hard she thought she might be sick. She had come to Copper Ridge to find the truth, to clear his name, for him and for the 7-year-old girl who had wrapped chubby arms around her waist and whispered, "Please be my mama." "I don't know anything," Magnolia lied, voice breaking. "Let me go. I didn't do anything wrong." Laughter swelled like a wave. "Ain't nobody gonna want a bride like that," one ranch hand snorted. "Grimm must be desperate or blind." "Maybe we should auction her off again," another shouted. "Start the bidding at a sack of chicken feed." For a moment, Magnolia wished the floorboards would open and swallow her. She had been sold once by her own family, packed into a wagon like freight, chased through the forest by bandits, left to die by a creek. She had thought the worst was behind her until Blackwell's men found her and dragged her here. Outside, the winter wind howled down the main street of Copper Ridge, pushing a swirl of snow through the swinging saloon doors. They flew open with a crack like a gunshot. Every head turned. A man stepped in from the storm, filling the doorway, broad shoulders under a worn buffalo hide coat, dark hair tied back at his neck, jaw rough with several days' beard. Snow clung to his boots and the brim of his hat. His eyes, cold and blue as glacier ice, locked onto the sheriff's hand on Magnolia's arm. "Let her go," the stranger said, voice low and steady. The sheriff sneered. "And who in hell are you to be giving orders in my town?" The man's gaze didn't waver. He slid one glove off, revealing a scarred, burned hand that made a few men at the back of the room mutter. "I'm a wanted man," he said quietly, every word dropping like a hammer on an anvil. "Name's Elijah Stone, and that woman is under my protection." Magnolia's knees nearly buckled. It was him, the man whose wife they said he'd murdered, the man whose daughter had clung to Magnolia's dress by the firelight and begged, "Please don't leave us. Please be my mama." Before I tell you what happened in that saloon, before the first shot rang out and Magnolia learned what a man will risk for the woman his little girl calls mama, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from right now? The moment Elijah Stone stepped fully into the saloon, the room shifted, not with noise, but with a sudden, uneasy quiet. Men who had been laughing at Magnolia only seconds before now stiffened, glancing toward the rifles mounted on the wall, the pistol at the sheriff's hip, the back exit behind the card tables. Elijah didn't seem to notice any of them. His eyes were fixed entirely on Magnolia Hayes. She stood trembling near the bar, mud on her hem, knuckles scraped, full figure drawn tight with fear. Stray curls clung to the soft curve of her cheek where the sheriff's slap had reddened her skin. When she met Elijah's gaze, shame and relief collided in her chest so fiercely she could barely breathe. "Let her go," Elijah repeated, stepping forward with the slow, deliberate calm of a man who'd survived too much to ever rush into danger again. The sheriff snorted. "So the fire starter shows his face. You've got nerve, Stone. Come to turn yourself in?" Elijah didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so hard the muscle jumped near his ear. Beneath his coat, Magnolia recognized the frayed cuff of the same shirt he had worn the day she collapsed beside the creek, the day his little daughter Rosie had found her. Magnolia remembered waking in that crude cabin, her body weak and feverish, and she remembered the moment Elijah stepped through the door, tall, silent, half wild from 2 years of running. She had been terrified at first, until she saw Rosie, a bright-eyed girl with tangled curls, run to her and wrap tiny arms around her waist. "Are you going to stay?" the child had whispered. "Please, don't go away like Mama did." Magnolia had never been wanted before, not by her parents, who had accepted Silas Grimm's $500 without a flicker of hesitation, not by the suitors who turned up their noses at her size, not by anyone, but Rosie had clung to her as if she were made of sunlight, and Elijah, though wary, had allowed Magnolia to stay, if only for a little while. A little while had become weeks. Weeks had become something that felt dangerously close to belonging. She cooked over their stone hearth, mended Rosie's dresses, learned the patterns of Elijah's silence, not coldness, but a man's fear that anything he touched might turn to ash again. Magnolia had seen the way he smoothed Rosie's hair when he thought no one watched, the way he stood outside their door during storms so Rosie could sleep unafraid, the way he murmured Hannah's name, his dead wife, so softly it broke Magnolia's heart. She had fallen in love before she realized it was happening, and then she made a decision that had changed everything. She would go to Copper Ridge and seek the truth Elijah was too cautious to chase. She would prove he had been framed. She would free him, free Rosie, and maybe one day she could be more than a temporary guest in their hidden life. But Copper Ridge had welcomed her with cruelty. The sheriff released her now, only because Elijah had come within arm's reach. Magnolia pushed back her shoulders despite the sting along her cheek, refusing to shrink under the curious eyes of half the town. "Stone," the sheriff said, resting a hand on his holster, "you're wanted for murder, and that woman is wanted for questioning in the disappearance of Silas Grimm's property, namely herself. You both belong in a cell." Magnolia's pulse jumped. She hadn't known about that latest lie. Elijah didn't look at the sheriff. He kept his eyes on Magnolia as if memorizing every bruise. "Did he hurt you?" The sheriff barked a laugh. "She fell. Fat ones always do." Elijah stepped forward, and every man in the saloon instinctively stepped back. Not because he drew a weapon. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a weapon sharpened by loss, forged by betrayal, hardened by 2 brutal years in the Rocky Mountain wilds. "Touch her again," Elijah murmured, "and I will bury you myself." Magnolia's breath caught. Her heart thudded with something far more dangerous than fear. "Elijah," she whispered, voice shaking, "you shouldn't be here. They'll hang you." Let them try. His gaze softened for a rare, fleeting second. I told Rosie I would bring you home, the sheriff spat. Home? You think a murderer and a runaway bride get to play house in these parts? This town belongs to Mayor Blackwell, not to criminals. At the name, Magnolia felt a cold stab of dread. Blackwell's men had abducted her. Blackwell had interrogated her. Blackwell had beaten her for answers she refused to give. But the sheriff didn't know that Elijah already understood the truth. Magnolia had seen the mayor's journals. She had heard Thomas Whitmore confess what he had witnessed the night Elijah's house burned. She had collected proof Blackwell would kill to reclaim. Magnolia swallowed hard. Elijah, there's something I didn't get the chance to give you. We'll talk later, he said, voice firm. Right now, you stay behind me. The sheriff flashed a grin full of yellowed teeth. Boys, he called over his shoulder, why don't you stand up and help me collect the bounty? $500 for Stone, $50 for the runaway bride, enough for drinks all around. Chairs scraped, boots scuffed. Magnolia's breath hitched as 5 men rose, hands drifting toward rifles and pistols. Elijah glanced at her once, only once, but the meaning was clear. Stay close, don't run, I'll get you out. Magnolia had no idea how, but she knew one thing for certain. He had come for her. He had risked everything to walk into this room. And if she had to stand behind him and face every gun in Copper Ridge to protect the truth she carried, she would. Gunfire hadn't erupted, not yet. But the tension inside the Copper Ridge saloon was drawn taut as a wire about to snap. 5 armed men fanned out to block the doors, while the sheriff swaggered forward, convinced he finally had his prize. Elijah Stone, he crowed, by order of Mayor Blackwell, you're under arrest, and the girl too. Magnolia stiffened as Elijah took one slow step back toward her, guiding her with an instinctive sweep of his arm. He didn't look frightened. He looked steady, controlled, the way a mountain looks moments before an avalanche breaks loose. When the sheriff reached for his pistol, Elijah moved. Not quickly, precisely. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the sheriff's wrist, twisted hard, and slammed the man's hand onto the bar. The sheriff howled, his gun clattering away. Before any of the hired guns could fire, Elijah shoved the sheriff straight into them, sending bodies crashing, chairs toppling, and whiskey spilling across the floor. Magnolia didn't wait to be told. She ran, not out of fear, but because Elijah had whispered just one word under his breath as he moved. Run. He didn't mean away from him. He meant toward the back alley, toward escape. Elijah threw a chair through the nearest window, grabbed Magnolia's wrist, and together they vaulted into the freezing night, boots crunching into snow. Shouts followed immediately. Stop them! They're getting away. Shoot if you have to. Elijah shielded Magnolia with his body as bullets cracked into the frozen wood around them. Snow sprayed, horses neighed in panic, and Magnolia felt Elijah's hand tighten around hers as he pulled her behind a row of stacked crates. Stay low, he murmured. She did, but her chest heaved with fear and shame. I'm sorry, she whispered. They caught me. I failed. You didn't fail, Elijah said, gripping her shoulders. You survived, and you found proof. That's more than I ever could have asked. A gunshot split the air just inches from his head. Elijah swore softly. He grabbed Magnolia's waist, startling her, and lifted her onto the back of a nearby sorrel mare. She clung to the saddle horn, her pulse pounding. Elijah, what about you? He swung up behind her, his chest pressing to her back, arms bracketing her as he seized the reins. "I'm right here," he murmured. "Hold on to me." The horse bolted forward as Elijah kicked hard, launching them down the narrow alley. Bullets hissed overhead, but Magnolia felt only the strength of the man behind her, the heat of him despite the snow, the steady breath at her ear, the sure, capable grip on the reins. They burst onto the main road, hooves pounding over frozen mud. "Elijah, where are we going?" "The mountains," he said. "We need the cover of the forest. They won't track us easily in the storm." Snow whipped sideways across the sky, the wind howling as if the Rockies themselves were warning intruders to turn back. Magnolia shivered, her fingers going numb. Elijah noticed immediately. He wrapped one arm around her middle, pulling her into him. "Lean back," he said. "Share my coat. It'll block the wind." Magnolia did, and warmth enveloped her. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, the rise and fall of his breathing, the tension coiled in his muscles. "Elijah," she whispered, "I didn't want to drag you into danger." He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. "You didn't drag me anywhere. Rosie's been crying for you every night since you left. She thinks you're her mother. You think I could ignore that?" Her throat tightened. "But if they catch you—" "They won't." The absolute certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Elijah was not a man who made promises lightly. Hours passed as they rode deeper into the mountains. Following narrow paths Magnolia couldn't see in the swirling snow, Elijah guided the horse with the instinct of a man who belonged to these woods, who knew every ridge, every frozen stream, every holler where wind echoed like ghosts. Finally, when Magnolia's hands had gone numb and her jaw ached from the cold, Elijah slowed the horse beside a rocky overhang. "We camp here for the night." Magnolia slid from the saddle, her legs wobbling. Elijah steadied her instantly, one large hand at her waist. "You're freezing," he murmured. "So are you." "I'm used to it." He led her beneath the overhang, sheltered from the wind. There he gathered fallen branches, striking flint until sparks caught. Within minutes, a small fire crackled, illuminating the hollow of snow around them with warm, flickering light. Magnolia held her hands near the flames, shivering. "You should get closer," Elijah said quietly. She nodded and moved until her knees nearly touched the fire. Elijah shrugged off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. "What about you?" she protested. "I built up the fire. I'll be fine." But she had watched him survive 2 winters in the wild. Magnolia knew the signs of cold in a man: stiff fingers, tight shoulders, a rasp in his voice. "Elijah," she whispered, "sit beside me." For a moment he hesitated. Then he lowered himself onto the ground, shoulder to shoulder with her, letting their shared heat battle the bitter mountain wind. Silence settled over them, soft, warm, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Magnolia spoke. "I found proof," she murmured. "Whitmore told me everything. I saw Blackwell's journals. I wanted to bring it back to you. That's why they caught me." Elijah's jaw clenched. "They hurt you because of me." "No," she said softly. "They hurt me because of Blackwell, because I told them nothing. I wouldn't betray you." The firelight flickered across his face, revealing something like awe, something like pain. "You could have died," he said. "You could have too," she countered. His gaze locked onto hers. "For Rosie," he murmured. "I'd die for her." "And for me?" Magnolia whispered without thinking. Elijah's breath hitched, just a fraction, but she felt it. He looked away, not out of rejection, but out of fear. Fear of wanting something he didn't think he deserved. "Magnolia," he said, voice low, "don't ask me questions I don't know how to answer." She didn't push him. Instead, she leaned her head gently onto his shoulder. After a long moment, he let out a breath and allowed her. Above them, the wind howled around the mountains, but inside the circle of firelight, Magnolia felt a small, fragile warmth blooming, hope. By the time Elijah and Magnolia reached the hidden valley where his cabin stood, dawn was only a pale smear behind the pines. Snow coated the roof like icing, smoke drifting from the chimney in a thin blue ribbon. Rosie must have kept the fire going, just as her father had taught her. The moment Elijah lifted Magnolia from the horse, the cabin door flew open. Rosie sprinted across the yard, bare feet thudding on packed snow, hair in wild curls. "Mama Maggie!" she cried. Magnolia barely had time to open her arms before the child leapt into them, wrapping her legs around Magnolia's waist and burying her face in her neck. "I knew you'd come back," Rosie whispered fiercely. "I prayed every night." Magnolia pressed her cheek against the girl's hair, tears burning her eyes. "I promised you I would." Elijah watched them, silent, motionless, a snowfall's worth of emotion flickering behind his eyes. When Magnolia finally managed to put Rosie down, Elijah guided both of them inside. Warmth hit Magnolia instantly. The smell of burning pine, the faint sweetness of dried berries simmering in a pot, the rugged simplicity of the home she had grown to love. Nothing had changed. The sturdy wooden table Elijah had carved by hand, the 3 mismatched chairs, Rosie's tiny mittens drying on the mantel, Magnolia's apron folded neatly on the hook where she had left it before sneaking off to Copper Ridge. Each detail pricked her heart. She hadn't realized how desperately she'd needed this feeling, belonging, until she stepped inside again. Rosie tugged Magnolia toward the hearth. "Mama Maggie, come sit. I kept your blanket on the chair so it'd stay warm." The child dragged the patchwork quilt, crooked seams, uneven squares that Magnolia had stitched herself, toward her and draped it across her lap. Elijah crouched beside the fire, poking the logs until sparks danced upward. "How bad did they hurt you?" he asked quietly. Rosie's head snapped up. Who hurt her? Magnolia touched the child's cheek, smoothing her curls. "No one will hurt me now, sweetheart." But Elijah's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the bruises peeking from the collar of Magnolia's dress. "You shouldn't have gone alone." "I know," she whispered, "but I couldn't bear the thought of you and Rosie trapped forever. I wanted to help." He stared into the fire, shoulders tense. "You shouldn't risk your life for mine." Rosie blinked between them. "But she's family. Families protect each other." Elijah inhaled sharply, caught off guard by the simplicity of his daughter's truth. Magnolia felt her throat tighten. Family. Rosie already claimed her. Elijah simply hadn't let himself believe he had the right to claim her back. The hours that followed unfolded with a fragile tenderness. Magnolia moved slowly, body aching, but she insisted on helping prepare breakfast. Elijah tried to stop her. "You need rest," he said. She shook her head softly. "Let me do this, making a home. It's the one thing I know I'm good at." He didn't argue again. While she worked beside him slicing dried apples and stirring oats into boiling water, Elijah hovered near, not saying much, but always close enough to catch her if she stumbled. When she reached for a jar on the top shelf, he stepped behind her, hand braced on the wood above her head, his breath brushing her temple as he retrieved it. When her hands trembled, cutting fruit, he covered them with his own, steadying them. Little things, small gestures, but each one made her heartbeat flutter in ways she could no longer deny. Their elbows brushed, their fingers grazed. Each accidental touch brought heat to Magnolia's cheeks and a tightness to Elijah's throat. Rosie noticed too. Children always do. She plopped herself on the table bench, swinging her legs, grinning wide. "You two look like you like each other," she announced. Magnolia froze, spoon halfway to the pot. Elijah nearly dropped a tin cup. Rosie tilted her head innocently. "It's good if you like each other. When grown-ups like each other, they stay." Magnolia's cheeks burned warm. Elijah's ears went red. To change the subject, Magnolia served breakfast, and the three of them ate together. Elijah kept glancing at Magnolia's bowl, sliding the bigger portion toward her each time she hesitated. She noticed, and so did Rosie. "Papa," Rosie whispered loudly, "Mama Maggie can see you doing that." Elijah cleared his throat and looked away, embarrassed. Magnolia smiled behind her spoon. After breakfast, Elijah stepped outside to split firewood. Magnolia tried to follow, but Rosie tugged her back. "He does that when he's worried," Rosie said seriously. "Chopping wood makes him feel like he can fix things." Magnolia's heart ached. When she finally stepped out to join him, Elijah was bare-armed in the snow, muscles flexing with each swing of the axe. The sight made Magnolia's breath catch, not from desire alone, but from the weight he carried silently. Without a word, she knelt to gather the chopped logs. "You don't need to do that," Elijah said roughly. "But I want to," Magnolia replied gently. For a long moment, he watched her, snowflakes landing on his dark hair, melting on his lashes. Something softened in his expression. They stacked wood together in silence, comfortable silence. When Magnolia's fingers brushed his while passing a log, Elijah didn't pull away. Inside again, she swept the floors while Rosie read aloud from her favorite book. Halting words, soft voice, all determination. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, stitching a tear in his jacket, though Magnolia noticed his eyes drift often to her. Every small domestic moment wrapped them closer, binding them with threads stronger than fear or uncertainty. Near sunset, Magnolia stirred a pot of rabbit stew, while Elijah carved a sliver of wood into a toy horse for Rosie. Firelight gilded his profile, catching the faint scar along his jaw, the one he'd earned years before, protecting Hannah from a wolf attack. Magnolia watched him, not the scar, the gentleness. He felt her gaze and lifted his head. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Elijah," she whispered, "I know the truth now, about Blackwell, about everything. We can prove your innocence." He shook his head. "Blackwell's men will hunt us harder after last night." "Then let them," Magnolia said softly. "You've run long enough." His eyes locked on hers, vulnerable, uncertain, yearning. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "Not in this cabin, not with me. I'm not a safe man." "You're the safest man I've ever known," she answered without hesitation. Elijah looked away, jaw tight, as Rosie climbed into his lap. He gathered her instinctively, hand splaying across her small back. Magnolia's chest warmed. This was a family, imperfect, bruised by fate, but real. Later that night, after Rosie fell asleep clutching her wooden horse, Magnolia stepped outside for fresh air. The snow had eased, leaving the world hushed, silvered, peaceful. Elijah followed her quietly. "You shouldn't be alone in the dark," he murmured. She turned, breath clouding in the cold. "I wanted to think." "What about?" "Belonging," she whispered, "and how this place feels like home." He went still. "Magnolia," he said softly, "don't say things like that unless you're certain." "I am certain." He closed the distance by one step, then another. His hand hovered near hers, not touching, but close enough that she felt its warmth. "Tell me why," he said, voice rough. She met his gaze steadily. "Because when I'm here, I don't feel like a burden. I feel needed, wanted." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "You're not a burden." "And you?" He swallowed. "I don't know how to want things anymore," he admitted, voice breaking. "But when I look at you—" Magnolia held her breath. "I remember how." Silence wrapped around them like a second snowfall. Then Elijah did something he rarely allowed himself. He reached for her hand, not the kiss, not the confession, not yet, but a beginning, small, trembling, real. Storm clouds gathered over the mountains the next morning, low, heavy, gray, as if the sky itself sensed the tension building inside the small cabin. Magnolia felt it the moment she woke, a tightness in the air, an unease humming beneath the warmth of the hearth. Elijah had barely spoken since dawn. He chopped wood until sweat glistened on his brow despite the cold. He checked the snares twice, circled the perimeter 3 times, restocked bullets, sharpened knives. All the while, Rosie watched him with a worried crease between her brows. "Papa's doing too much," she whispered, clutching Magnolia's sleeve. "He does that when something bad is coming." Magnolia touched the girl's hair gently. "Nothing will happen to you, I promise." But she wasn't sure, not after what she'd seen in Copper Ridge. Blackwell's power stretched far. His reach was cruel. And now Magnolia knew something he would kill to keep buried. She waited until Rosie went outside to feed the chickens. Then she joined Elijah near the woodpile, wrapping a shawl tight around herself. "Elijah," she said quietly, "talk to me." He didn't look up from the hatchet. "About what?" "You're pacing like a hunted animal." "I am a hunted animal." His voice wasn't angry. It was weary, full of an old grief that lived deep in his bones. Magnolia stepped closer. "Tell me what's wrong." Elijah drove the hatchet into the stump with a crack. Snowflakes clung to his beard, melting immediately against the heat of his skin. "You should never have gone to Copper Ridge," he said roughly. "You were nearly killed because of me." "I chose to go." "You chose wrong." She flinched, but didn't back away. "If something had happened to you," Elijah continued, his voice low and tight, "I would have never forgiven myself." Magnolia swallowed. "And if something happens to you, how do you think I would feel? How do you think Rosie would feel?" At Rosie's name, Elijah finally looked at her. His eyes were wild around the edges, fear, love, confusion tangled together. "She's already lost one mother," he murmured. "I won't let her lose another." The words hit Magnolia like a blow of warmth and sorrow at once. "Elijah," she whispered, "she sees me as family. You do too. Why won't you admit it?" He turned away sharply. "Because every woman who stands beside me ends up in danger. Hannah, you, and Rosie most of all." Magnolia moved around him, placing her hand on his arm. He stiffened. "You didn't kill Hannah," she said. "Blackwell did. You know that now." "I wasn't there," he rasped. "I left her alone that night." "You were working, trying to provide for her. And she died because of it." Magnolia's throat tightened. She saw it then. The core of Elijah's torment wasn't fear of the law or fear of dying. It was fear of failing the people he loved. "Elijah," she said softly, "Rosie told me once that the safest place in the world is your arms." He closed his eyes, a tremor running through him. "She's wrong," he whispered. "I'm cursed." Magnolia stepped closer, cupping his cheek. "You're not cursed. You're good. You're strong. And you're the best father I've ever seen." His breath caught, but before he could answer, Rosie's scream ripped through the cold air. Magnolia spun. "Rosie!" The child burst from behind the chicken coop, sprinting toward them with terror in her eyes. "Riders!" she cried. "Papa, men are coming! Lots of them!" Elijah's body went rigid. "Inside!" he ordered. Magnolia scooped Rosie into her arms and ran for the cabin while Elijah grabbed his rifle from the porch. His movements were no longer slow and worn. They were swift, deadly, purposeful. Magnolia slammed the cabin door shut and lowered Rosie onto a stool. "It's all right," she whispered, though fear clawed her throat. "We're safe. Your father is here." Rosie trembled. "Are they the bad men? The ones who took Mama Maggie?" Magnolia held her tight. "They won't take anyone today." Outside, hooves thundered across the snow. Magnolia peeked through the crack in the wooden shutters. Her breath froze. Half a dozen riders galloped into the clearing, Blackwell's hired guns, unmistakable in their dusters and rifles. 2 carried torches, flames licking the icy wind. Magnolia recognized the nearest man as the brute who had held her down while the mayor questioned her. He shouted toward the cabin, "Stone, come out! Mayor Blackwell wants his property back, both of them!" Rosie whimpered. "Papa." Elijah didn't answer. He strode back into the cabin long enough to bar the door and grab ammunition. "What do we do?" Magnolia whispered. Elijah's jaw tightened. "They want you, and the journals, and Whitmore's testimony." "I don't have the journals. They took them," Magnolia said. "You memorized what mattered." She blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because you're the kind of woman who survives." Before she could reply, a bullet tore through the window frame, sending splinters flying. Magnolia shielded Rosie with her body. "Stay down," Elijah commanded, firing back through the gap in the shutters. Thunder cracked through the trees as gunfire echoed. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Smoke thickened the air. Magnolia clutched Rosie tight, heart hammering. She wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but she didn't, because Elijah stood between them and danger, unflinching, unbreakable. And for the first time, Magnolia understood something terrifying. She loved him enough to die here beside him. Another volley of bullets rained against the cabin. The wood shook. A window shattered. "They're trying to surround us," Magnolia whispered. "I know." Elijah's voice was calm, too calm. "They won't storm the cabin yet. They want to force us out." "Then what do we do?" He reloaded, eyes flicking to both of them. "We hold," he said. "We hold as long as we have to." Magnolia crawled closer, placing a trembling hand on his back for support. "Elijah," she whispered, "I'm not afraid if I'm with you." He turned slightly, just enough to see her, the truth laid bare between the falling snow and the crackling fire. And then he said the words he had been terrified to admit. "I can't lose you too." Before Magnolia could answer, before she could tell him he wasn't going to, a torch smashed against the cabin wall. Flames flared. Rosie screamed. Elijah's eyes widened in raw terror, memories of another fire tearing through him like a blade. "Not again," he breathed. "God, not again." The cabin crackled. Smoke rose, and Magnolia realized the real battle had begun. Fire licked up the side of the cabin, crackling loud enough to drown out the shouts outside. Smoke gathered in thin threads along the rafters. Magnolia's pulse roared in her ears, but Elijah was already moving. Swift, controlled, his fear sharpened into action. "Magnolia," he said, voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, "get Rosie low to the ground. Keep her wrapped in a wet cloth." Magnolia nodded and dragged the water pail toward them. Rosie whimpered as Magnolia soaked a cloth and pressed it gently against her mouth and nose. "Papa," Rosie cried, "don't let the fire get our house." Elijah froze for a heartbeat, because those same words had once come from another small voice, in another burning home. He knelt quickly, taking Rosie's chin in his hand. "I won't let anything happen to you," he whispered. "Not again." Then he stood, rifle in hand, eyes burning as fiercely as the flames outside. "They're trying to smoke us out," Magnolia said. "No," Elijah murmured. "They're trying to break me." Another torch smashed against the back wall. Heat surged, smoke thickened. The men outside hollered with glee. "Stone," one called. "You want to lose another woman to fire? Come out before this one burns too." Elijah's grip tightened on the rifle until his knuckles whitened. Magnolia reached for him. "Don't listen. They're trying to pull you out into the open." He looked at her, truly looked, and she saw grief, rage, and something deeper twisting together. "I can't watch another woman die in flames," he said hoarsely. "You won't," Magnolia replied, stepping close enough to touch his chest, "because I'm not going anywhere, not without you." A crash outside made them all flinch. More shouting, more torches. The horses tied near the barn screamed in panic. "They're going to surround the cabin completely," Magnolia whispered. "We'll be trapped." "They think this place is my weakness," Elijah said, jaw tightening. "But they're wrong. My only weakness is—" He stopped. Smoke burned Magnolia's eyes, but she reached for him again, steadying him. "Say it," she whispered. His throat flexed. His voice was raw when he answered. "Is you." For a heartbeat, the fire seemed to fall silent. Then a bullet ripped through the shutter, burying itself in the center post. Elijah snapped back into action. He shoved a heavy trunk against the burning wall to slow the spread of flames. "We're leaving," he said. "Through the back. I built an escape hatch under the floorboards. Never wanted to use it, but now we have to," Magnolia finished. Together, they pulled up the loose plank Elijah had concealed years ago. Cold air rushed upward from the narrow tunnel beneath. Elijah lowered Rosie first. "Follow the tunnel until you see light. Don't stop." Rosie crawled into the darkness, clutching her cloth. "Elijah," Magnolia said, smoke stinging her throat, "we have to move." But he didn't descend after Rosie. Instead, he turned toward the front door, rifle in hand. "Elijah, no!" Magnolia grabbed his arm. "You can't fight all of them." "I'm not letting them follow you," he said. "If they reach that tunnel—" "They won't," she insisted. "We need you alive. Rosie needs you. I need you." The fire roared, flames devouring the roof beam above them. Elijah looked at her, really looked, and in that instant the cold mountain man with the scarred hands and haunted eyes was stripped down to his wounded core. He cupped her face, thumb brushing the soot on her cheek. "Magnolia Hayes," he murmured, "you brought light back into this place, into me. If anything happens to you—" "It won't," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his, "because I'm not letting you go into that fight alone." Outside, Hoofbeats thundered as reinforcements arrived, more men, more guns. Elijah's eyes widened. They brought the whole damn posse. "We have to go," Magnolia said. "Now." He hesitated. She didn't. Magnolia grabbed his coat, yanked him toward the hatch, and kissed him, quick, fierce, fire-hot, filled with every truth she had been too afraid to say. Then she pulled back and whispered, "If you stay here, you die. If you come with me, we live." For the first time in 2 years, Elijah Stone chose to run not from fear, but toward hope. He took Magnolia's hand and plunged into the tunnel after Rosie, sealing the hatch behind them as flames consumed the cabin above. Behind them, guns cracked. Ahead of them, wind howled through the pines. The hunt had begun. Snow swallowed the three of them the moment they emerged from the hidden tunnel at the base of the ridge. The wind was sharp enough to sting Magnolia's cheeks, but compared to the inferno behind them, the blazing cabin collapsing in on itself, it felt like mercy. Rosie clung to Magnolia's waist, trembling. Elijah crouched low, scanning the tree line for riders. Flames illuminated the sky behind them, orange and furious, smoke darkening the dawn. "My home," Elijah whispered. Magnolia turned to him. The fire was reflected in his eyes, same fire that had taken Hannah, same fire that had chased him into 2 years of shadowed existence. "I'm sorry," Magnolia murmured. He shook his head once. "It was just wood." But Magnolia could hear the crack in his voice, the memory in it. Rosie tugged his coat. "Papa, we can build another house. Mama Maggie will help." Magnolia froze. Elijah did too. He slowly knelt in front of his daughter. Even through fear and smoke and the pounding of distant hoofbeats, he smiled, faint, tender, broken. "You'd like that?" he asked. Rosie nodded vigorously. "We'll build a big house with room for all of us, and Mama Maggie's blanket can go on the bed, and I'll have a window, and Papa won't be sad anymore." Elijah pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. Magnolia wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She'd never seen a man hold on to something so small, so fragile, with such devotion. A sound echoed through the forest, the distant shouts of riders searching the foothills. Elijah stiffened. "They're fanning out," he murmured. "We have minutes, maybe less." Magnolia stepped close, touching his sleeve. "Then we keep moving, together." He looked at her, snow catching in his beard, melting with the heat that rose beneath his skin. His gaze traveled over her bruised cheek, her torn dress, the courage in her eyes. "You're safe here," he said softly. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a warning. It was a vow. She swallowed hard. This place. With you? With Rosie?" Elijah nodded. "If you'll have it," he murmured. "If you'll stay." Magnolia's breath caught. Snowflakes landed in her lashes. "I didn't come back for the cabin," she whispered. "I came back for you." For a moment, despite the danger crawling closer through the trees, the world stilled. Rosie slipped her small hand into Magnolia's, and Elijah's fingers covered both theirs, large, calloused, trembling. Behind them, the cabin finally collapsed in a roar of sparks. Ahead of them, only forest waited, dark, uncertain, vast. Elijah rose, pulling Magnolia and Rosie close, holding them as if anchoring himself against a storm too great to name. "This is your home now," he said, "if you want it to be." Magnolia leaned into him, her voice barely more than a breath. "I already chose my home." Elijah's arm tightened around her, but the shouts grew louder, closer, and as the three of them slipped deeper into the forest's embrace, hand in hand, hearts tangling like roots beneath the snow, the question that hovered between their breaths remained unanswered. Was love strong enough to outrun the world that hunted them? Stories like this one remind us that even in the harshest winters of our lives, a single act of courage or a single person willing to stand beside us can change everything. Every time you listen, comment, or share where you're watching from, it reminds me how these tales travel across mountains, oceans, and time zones to reach your heart. So tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story today? And if you still believe in love that fights back, love that heals old wounds, love that refuses to let go, then don't go far. The next story is already on its way.